Snitches are a dying breed. Also, snitches get stitches. But who are they? A snitch is anyone who provides information to authorities. Cooperators, informants, and sometimes even victims who reported their own assaults. For outlaw biker snitches, it's worse. When a Hell's Angel, Mongol, or Bandito flips, he betrays a brotherhood, and that brotherhood has members everywhere. In prison, biker snitches face isolation, violence, and death. This is the story of what happens to biker snitches behind bars. In prison, snitches face the same fate: social isolation, verbal abuse shouted through cell bars, threats written on bathroom walls, physical violence that can end in death. But for outlaw biker snitches, it's exponentially worse. They're violating a code enforced through decades of extreme violence, testifying against men who view cooperation as the ultimate sin, men with long memories, men with brothers in every major prison in America. But here's what most people don't know. For decades, in one of America's most notorious prison systems, snitches weren't outcasts at all. They were the most powerful inmates in the institution. They wore special clothes, carried weapons openly, controlled entire cell blocks, drank coffee with prison captains, settled disputes, punished rule breakers. They enjoyed privileges ordinary inmates could only dream about. This wasn't hidden. It wasn't underground. It was official policy, a system that worked for decades until it collapsed in an explosion of violence that changed American corrections forever. Johnson Unit, 1981. It was in 1981 that researchers led by James Marquardt conducted a 19-month study inside Johnson Unit, a maximum security prison in rural Texas. One researcher actually worked as a guard. What he documented was published in the British Journal of Criminology. The findings revealed something shocking. Johnson housed 3,200 violent offenders with only 240 guards at that time, one guard for every 13 inmates. But the prison had an official network of inmate informants who acted as surrogate guards. They were called building tenders and turnkeys, and they weren't weak outcasts hiding in protective custody. They were the most aggressive, feared, and respected inmates in the facility. Murderers, armed robbers, contract killers. Of the 18 head building tenders, 5 were serving time for murder, 8 for armed robbery. One was described as an enforcer and contract-style killer, average sentence, 32 years. These men openly informed on other inmates. They walked the halls freely, carried concealed weapons, drank coffee with prison captains in the major's office. They controlled entire cell blocks. Staff referred to the blocks by their names: Watson's Tank, Robinson's Block. In total, approximately 360 inmates, or 11% of the population, worked as official informants. There was no hiding, no secrecy. Building tenders pointed out other inmates' misdeeds to guards, in front of everyone. When guards searched a cell, the suspected inmate knew exactly who had tipped them off. But these informants weren't stigmatized. Neither were they beaten, nor were they isolated. Instead, they were rewarded. But the most shocking is the rewards they would receive. The privileges and the price. The Marquardt study documented extensive privileges building tenders would receive in exchange for their cooperation. They would wear specially pressed clothes, clean, crisp, professional. While ordinary inmates wore poorly fitting white coats, BTs would wear distinctive green quilted jackets. Their cell doors would remain unlocked. They would move freely throughout their blocks day and night. Ordinary inmates stayed locked up except for work, meals, and recreation. Guards knew. Guards approved. In a prison where weapon possession meant solitary confinement for ordinary inmates, BTs would walk around armed. Some BTs became so loyal that they would openly state they'd kill another inmate if their officer ordered it. Because of their position and privileges, BTs were feared, hated, envied, and respected. They had a soft time while ordinary inmates suffered. What they reported. But privileges came with expectations. BTs had to deliver intelligence. They didn't report everything. They would screen information carefully. They'd pass to staff only serious threats. They would handle petty violations themselves, noise complaints, minor theft, small disputes, but they'd report major threats immediately. Escape plans, weapons, drug trafficking, sexual coercion, violence. That's how the system worked. BTs would gather intelligence, staff would act on it. Problems would be solved before they escalated. The modern snitch reality. The building tender system collapsed in the early 1980s. Federal courts ordered Texas to dismantle it completely, hire more guards, end inmate control. When the BTs were removed, the traditional convict code returned. But the definition of snitching had expanded, dangerously. George T. Wilkerson witnessed this firsthand. A death row inmate at Central Prison in Raleigh, North Carolina, was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder in 2006. He'd spent years navigating the code. One day, his friend Kobe assaulted another inmate named Chris for changing the TV channel without permission. Broke his teeth out. When Kobe returned from solitary, guards had moved Chris to another block. Kobe complained, "That snitched on me." Wilkerson was confused. Chris was the victim. He'd been assaulted for changing a channel. Kobe's response was immediate. Snitching is when you inform on someone, period. If you get someone in trouble, that's snitching. The other inmates nodded in agreement. That label followed Chris for the rest of his sentence. Dry snitching. Wilkerson witnessed another incident. A lookout for a cell fight kept glancing nervously between a guard booth and the cell. His body language tipped off guards. They stormed the cell. Other inmates accused him of dry snitching. The lookout immediately slapped his accuser. Hard. The label disappeared. Wilkerson understood the lesson. Your reputation, your face, is your ticket to inclusion. Few things in here can make a man fight faster or damage his name worse than an acidic snitch sticker. The only way to remove the label was violence. 2 systems, same purpose. The building tender system had been officially sanctioned, structured. BTs informed openly with staff approval. The modern code was chaotic, contradictory, impossible to navigate. Snitches were hunted, isolated, and killed. But both systems served the same purpose: control through fear, control through violence, control through the constant threat of the snitch label. The only difference? Who wielded the power. The biker difference. For ordinary inmates, the snitch code is brutal and inescapable. For outlaw bikers who cooperate with law enforcement, it's exponentially worse. They face both codes simultaneously. The prison code labels them rats. The club code labels them traitors. And both demand the same punishment: death. When a Hell's Angel or Mongol or Bandito flips, he's not just breaking the convict code. He's violating a brotherhood that spans decades. A club with chapters in prisons across America. A network of affiliated gangs and support clubs in every major facility. He's betraying men who called him brother, who trusted him with their lives, who committed crimes alongside him, who depended on him for absolute loyalty. His testimony doesn't just get someone in trouble, it destroys entire chapters, ruins families, puts brothers behind bars for life. And those brothers have friends inside, waiting. What happens to biker snitches? To understand how the execution happens, you need to understand the network. Outlaw motorcycle clubs don't disappear when members go to prison. They maintain presence, structure, chain of command. The Hells Angels have members in federal prisons across the United States. USP Victorville, USP Coleman, USP Leavenworth, FCI Phoenix, dozens of facilities. The Mongols have members scattered throughout the federal system in state prisons in California, Nevada, Arizona, and Texas. The Banditos maintain a strong presence in Texas state prisons and federal facilities in Oklahoma, Kansas, and Colorado. But it's not just full-patch members. Support clubs extend the network further. The Red Devils support the Hells Angels. The Mongols have the Mongol Brotherhood prison gang. The Banditos have relationships with various Texas prison gangs. These aren't loose affiliations. They're organized extensions of club authority behind bars. When a cooperating witness enters the system, that network activates. Information spreads, not through official channels. The Brotherhood Indoctrination. To understand why biker networks hunt cooperators so relentlessly, you need to understand how deep the indoctrination runs. Every biker who earns his patch goes through a probation period, 6 months to 2 years as a prospect or striker. During this time, they're subjected to brutal abuse, all to test their devotion to the club. Initiation rituals are designed to break them down. By the time a member earns his full patch, he's been conditioned. When that member cooperates with law enforcement, he doesn't just break a rule. He violates a bond forged through humiliation, violence, and absolute submission. That's why the network inside activates so quickly, so efficiently, so violently. They're not just enforcing prison code, they're avenging a brotherhood. How snitches destroy lives. Snitch testimony doesn't just send cooperators to protective custody. It destroys innocent lives. According to the Innocence Project, almost half of all death row exonerations since the 1970s involved cases where jailhouse snitches provided false testimony. A 2004 study found that incentivized informant witnesses are the leading cause of wrongful convictions in U.S. capital cases. The incentives are too powerful to resist. As the Fifth Circuit observed, it is difficult to imagine a greater motivation to lie than the inducement of a reduced sentence. For bikers facing life under RICO statutes, the pressure to fabricate testimony is immense. A 1996 study found that 70 to 79% of high school students lied to gain extra credit points when given anonymity and incentive. If teenagers will lie for academic credit, criminals will absolutely lie to avoid life in prison. Fabricating testimony in motorcycle club cases is remarkably easy. Snitches don't need inside knowledge. They only need basic details about club structure, patch meanings, and common criminal activities. Information is available through court documents, news reports, and conversations with other inmates. A snitch can construct a convincing confession by simply knowing that a prospect becomes a full patch member, that national officers sanction violence, or that certain patches indicate specific crimes. The cost of lying is virtually zero. According to the Justice Project, perjury prosecutions of jailhouse snitches are almost non-existent. Snitches have everything to gain and nothing to lose by falsely reporting that fellow inmates confess to crimes. For innocent bikers, the consequences are catastrophic. Once accused, the club's code assumes guilt. Members don't investigate. They don't wait for trials. They act on information from cooperators and informants. An innocent man branded as a cooperator faces the same violence as an actual snitch. Isolation, threats, assaults, potential murder. In 2005, the Center for Wrongful Convictions examined 111 death row exonerations. In 51 of those cases, defendants were wrongfully sentenced to death based at least partly on testimony from witnesses with incentives to lie. Another study found that in 16 out of 97 exoneration cases, jailhouse snitches disclosed confessions that were never actually made. The confessions were entirely fabricated. In each instance, the snitch received benefits in exchange for testimony. Prosecutors offer deals. Inmates fabricate confessions. Juries believe the testimony. Innocent people go to prison. And in motorcycle club cases, those innocent people then face violence from their own brothers based on lies told by men trying to save themselves. The psychology of biker violence. Violence biker cooperators face is different from ordinary snitch attacks. It's rooted in psychology that makes it more unpredictable, more brutal, more permanent. A 2011 study by Brandon Prenger and Dr. Greg W. Etter at the University of Central Missouri examined psychological disorders prevalent in outlaw motorcycle gang members. The findings revealed patterns that explain the extreme violence cooperators face. Many outlaw bikers suffer from antisocial personality disorder. The DSM-4 defines it as a pattern of disregard for the rights of others, failure to conform to society's norms. Bikers don't just reject society's rules, they take pride in it. The world, FTW, is a common patch, not just a phrase, a philosophy. The study also identified intermittent explosive disorder as common among outlaw bikers. Long periods of calm, then sudden, unpredictable explosions of extreme violence. In January 2007, a sergeant-at-arms for a New Hampshire Outlaws chapter was drinking at his club's hangout. A man walked in wearing a Hells Angels support shirt. The sergeant-at-arms told him to remove it. The man refused. The sergeant-at-arms shot him dead. Over a shirt. That's not rage, that's enforcement. That's the mentality that governs biker culture inside and outside prison. For cooperators, this creates an impossible situation. They're not facing rational actors who calculate risk versus reward. Men who lack empathy. Men who feel no remorse. Men who will kill over a shirt. Imagine what they'll do to someone who testified against their brothers. The paperwork system. Federal inmates have developed sophisticated methods for verifying cooperation. The most direct, PACER, the Public Access to Court Electronic Records System. For a small fee, anyone can access federal court documents, plea agreements, sentencing memoranda, trial transcript. Inmates with outside contacts, family, friends, club members, request specific document searches. Within days, printed copies arrive through mail, passed to the inmate, reviewed by those who need to see it. But PACER isn't the only method. Some inmates request their own discovery through legal channels. Once obtained, documents circulate through the population, copied, distributed, analyzed. For MC cases, verification is even simpler. The club maintains records. They know who testified, who wore a wire, who gave statements, who helped build the RICO case. When a known cooperator arrives, there's no investigation needed. The verdict is already in. Why protective custody isn't enough. Once verified, most cooperators are placed in protective custody. Prison officials separate high-risk inmates into PC units. Separate housing, limited contact with general population. For some cooperators, this provides safety. They live among other informants, offenders, former gang members, the stigmatized, the vulnerable, the hated. It's isolation, punishment by another name, but it's survival. For biker cooperators, protective custody isn't always enough. First, PC units aren't immune to violence. They house inmates from rival gangs, different MCs, various criminal organizations. Tensions exist, conflicts arise, violence erupts. In 2021, a former Hells Angels member in protective custody at USP Lewisburg was assaulted by a former Mongols member also in PC. Different clubs, different cases, but both recognized each other. The Mongol member saw an opportunity, earn respect with his club by attacking a Hells Angels cooperator, even in protective custody. Even from a rival organization, the assault was brief, brutal. Guards intervened quickly. Both inmates received additional time in solitary, but the message was clear. PC doesn't guarantee safety. Second, PC requires constant transfers. When threats emerge, inmates are moved. Different facilities, different states, different security levels. This creates instability. No permanent housing, no consistent routine, no ability to settle into prison life, however miserable that life might be. Some biker cooperators have been transferred 10, 15, 20 times during their sentences, always one step ahead of threats, always looking over their shoulders. Third, PC is psychologically devastating. 23-hour lockdown, no programs, no jobs, no recreation, no social contact beyond brief exchanges with guards. Days blend together, weeks become months, months become years. The isolation breaks people. Depression, anxiety, paranoia, suicidal ideation. Some cooperators request release from PC, willing to risk violence for human contact, for movement, for normalcy. Prison officials usually refuse. They know what happens when high-profile cooperators return to general population. The life sentence beyond the sentence. Even after release, biker cooperators face consequences. The club doesn't forget. The brotherhood remembers betrayal. The network extends beyond prison walls. Former members who cooperated live in constant fear. They change names, move to different states, cut contact with family and friends, avoid biker bars, rallies, events. Some enter witness protection. Federal marshals provide new identities. Relocation assistance, ongoing monitoring. But witness protection has limits. It can't prevent all contact, can't eliminate all risk, can't erase the past. In 2011, a former Hells Angels member who had testified in multiple federal cases was found dead in Kentucky. He'd been in witness protection for 6 years, changed his name, relocated 3 times. Someone found him anyway. Shot twice in the head, execution style. Investigations suggested the club had tracked him through family contacts, monitored social media accounts of relatives, identified patterns, narrowed locations, then sent someone to finish the job. The murder sent a message. Cooperation has permanent consequences. The club's memory is long. The reach is wide. There is no true escape. The club's perspective. From the club's viewpoint, violence against cooperators isn't criminal. It's justice. The brotherhood operates on absolute loyalty. 3 can keep a secret if 2 are dead. That's not just a saying, it's operational security. When a member cooperates, he doesn't just betray individuals. He betrays the organization, the lifestyle, the code that held the club together for decades. He puts brothers behind bars, destroys chapters, exposes criminal enterprises, damages the club's reputation and power. From that perspective, violence is defensive, protective, necessary. It's not revenge, it's deterrence. Every cooperator who gets stabbed sends a message to potential informants. And the club believes that message must be sent, loudly, violently, permanently. Because if cooperation goes unpunished, the organization collapses. Nobody trusts anyone. The brotherhood dissolves, the club dies. So they enforce the code with extreme prejudice. The criminal enterprise at stake. The stakes aren't just personal, they're financial. Outlaw motorcycle clubs aren't street gangs. They're sophisticated criminal enterprises generating millions of dollars annually. When a member cooperates, he threatens a multi-million-dollar operation. A single cooperating witness in a RICO case can dismantle entire chapters, expose distribution networks, identify suppliers, connect crimes across state lines, seize millions in assets, shut down drug pipelines that took decades to establish. From the club's perspective, that cooperator isn't just a rat. He's an existential threat to the organization. That's why the response is so organized, so well-funded, so relentless. They're not punishing one man. They're sending a message to every member. Cooperation means death. The violence isn't revenge. It's corporate policy. The culture of violence. Violence isn't incidental to biker culture, it's foundational. In 1969, the Rolling Stones hired the Hells Angels to provide security at a concert at Altamont Speedway in Livermore, California. During the concert, a man named Meredith Hunter allegedly pulled a gun on a Hells Angel member. Another member stabbed Hunter to death in front of thousands of witnesses. The killing was caught on film. The Hells Angel was charged with murder. He was acquitted. The club rallied around him, protected him, celebrated him. That's the culture cooperators come from. A culture where violence is justified, where killing is defended, where the club always comes first. William Queen, an undercover ATF agent who infiltrated the Mongols, described the mentality. Nothing made the Mongols happier than loud music and a plentiful supply of beer, except maybe beating the shit out of an enemy. Violence isn't a last resort. It's entertainment. It's bonding, it's identity. And when a member cooperates, he becomes the enemy. The witness intimidation factor. The anti-snitch code doesn't just govern club members. It extends to civilians and witnesses. In multiple documented incidents involving outlaw bikers, witnesses were openly threatened with retaliation. The result, not a single person testified. Cases collapsed, not from lack of evidence, from fear. This pattern repeats across decades. Witnesses see crimes, guards document incidents, surveillance captures footage. But cases fall apart when witnesses refuse to speak. Restaurant owners, bar patrons, bystanders, even victims sometimes refuse to testify because they've seen what happens to snitches. When a biker cooperator enters prison, this reality multiplies. He's not just breaking club rules. He's violating a code that has terrorized entire communities for generations. A code that has collapsed hundreds of criminal cases through fear alone. A code that everyone inside and outside knows is enforced with extreme violence. The impossible choice. The impossible choice. Federal prosecutors offered deals to MC members facing decades in prison. Cooperate, testify, provide information, wear a wire. Build the RICO case. In exchange, reduced sentences. 10 years instead of life. 15 years instead of 30. Probation instead of prison. Some members take the deal. They look at their families, their children growing up without them, the possibility of dying behind bars. They choose cooperation. But that choice comes with a price they can't fully understand until it's too late. They see it as a simple transaction, testimony for reduced time. But they're not asking someone to break a rule. They're asking them to betray an identity. From the moment a prospect begins his probation, the indoctrination starts. 6 months to 2 years of brutal hazing, physical abuse, sexual humiliation, psychological torture, all designed to break down the individual, rebuild him as a brother. By the time he earns his full patch, he's been conditioned to view the club as the only thing that matters. The Rebels MC code states it clearly. Brotherhood is 100% for members of the club. You know there is going to be a brother there to give you a hand when you need it. That brotherhood is forged through shared trauma, shared violence, shared crimes. It's reinforced through club mottos. God forgives, outlaws don't. Snitches are a dying breed. These aren't empty threats. They're operational doctrine. He enters prison not as a convict doing time, but as a marked man, target, betrayer, rat. He faces isolation, violence, constant fear, protective custody, transfers, psychological torment. And when he's finally released, the threat doesn't end. It follows him, haunts him, forces him into hiding, into witness protection, into permanent exile from his former lives. Some cooperators, years into their sentences, express regret. They wish they'd taken the longer sentence, maintained loyalty, kept the code. At least then, they say, they could do their time with dignity, with respect, with brotherhood. Instead, they live in isolation, despised by other inmates, hunted by former brothers, existing in a permanent state of fear and loneliness. The reduced sentence becomes a life sentence of a different kind. This is what happens to biker snitches. Organized, brutal violence from men who once called them brother. The reduced sentence becomes a life sentence, and the brotherhood never stops hunting. Yet some brotherhoods don't last forever. Clubs have fallen, disbanded, or been destroyed entirely. Want to know which outlaw motorcycle clubs no longer exist? Check on the next video to see how it uncovers.